Hey everybody, it's the Mad Master here. I'm doing another video, and this time it's tackling the controversial subject of Pantera. So I wanted to do this video for a long time. Oh shit! Um, and it's kind of a bone of contention among metal fans and metal elitists and so forth that what Pantera's place it was in the metal world and what meaning they had with all their stuff. So that's the debate, but I just wanted to say this. So this is my history with Pantera. So I was watching the Headbangers Ball in the early '90s, and Cowboys from Hell came out, and Rob Halford was an early champion of that era of Pantera. I'll just say because I know they had 4 albums before Cowboys from Hell, power metal. I'll get to that album in a minute, but so the thing with Pantera is that was kind of a weird. Even that period of time was a weird period for metal because metal was going through some changes. So I'll give you an example. So Iron Maiden had come out with No Prayer for the Dying. All of a sudden, so they stripped down their stage show and they started wearing less spandex and all the stuff compared to Seventh Son and before. And they also started having more topical subjects in their songs on No Prayer for the Dying. Whereas like on Power Slave, they talked about songs about the Prisoner TV show or about ancient Egypt or something like that. So it was more about current events. And a lot of bands were starting to go that direction. And you had these like kind of these bands that were they were like hair glam in the mid to late '80s, and they were starting to like strip down and get more bluesy. You had George Lynch and his Lynch Mob band. You had Badlands with Jake E. Lee in the late '80s, early '90s, like '89, I think it was his first album, as far as I recall. You had all these bands they were trying to like strip stuff down and do more back to basics, and stuff like that. And that was kind of influencing a lot of what was going on with the rest of the metal. So Pantera comes out with Cowboys from Hell, and I liked it. It was. Oh, and another note about some of that, there was a lot of this funky stuff coming out, like Faith No More was big, and Red Hot Chili Peppers, and then Mordred, the band, the rap metal band, one of the early rap metal bands, came out, and a lot of these bands were coming out and doing more alternative sounding stuff a little bit here and there. Suicidal Tendencies hadn't come out with Art of Rebellion yet, but that would be definitely that album definitely has a place in metal's evolution with regards to alternative metal and all that. So, anyways, Cowboys from Hell. I heard it and I liked it, and but when I entered high school, my friend was really into Pantera, and he really liked it, but then all of a sudden he kind of got into more death metal, and basically he kind of disavowed Pantera as like, oh come on, they're just like kind of lightweight mall metal, blah blah blah, you know, Morbid Angels much better, Deicide or whoever, Immolation, So that kind of influenced me, and my friend also had this opinion about Pantera that sticks with me to this day, and I think it's pretty funny, controversial as it is. He called them hair death metal after Far Beyond Driven came out, because Far Beyond Driven, some of the angst and some of the aggression just feels a little bit forced. And I know Phil Anselmo's a pretty fucking twisted guy as far as everything, so maybe it's not forced, but the way that it was presented seemed like, oh, you're so tough now, you're Pantera. So this is what I think about Pantera. So I think they had a great deal of influence from other stuff, like, for example, Exhorder, who finally came out with their 3rd album, about a year ago, I think it was. I bought it on CD even. So they had a great deal of influence from that, and they had kind of for better or worse, they had a good influence and a bad influence on metal. I mean, let's just face that they made extreme metal more acceptable among people. I mean, Pantera took Morbid Angel out in like 1999 or 2000, and a lot of the trailer park type people that like were at that show that I went to laughed at Morbid Angel, which is fucking ridiculous. But Phil came out and did a song with them. He championed a lot of underground metal. Let's just credit him for that. He's like Mike Portnoy is with the prog metal thing. Like he'll take a band like Morbid Angel out, or he'll wear a Darkthrone shirt and a band pick. I mean, these guys, most of these bands are huge anyways, Darkthrone or Morbid Angel, but in the mainstream metal community or mainstream rock pop, they're not. The Billboard, Pantera was one of the bands on the Billboard charts. I think they were #1 or #2 in '94 for Far Beyond Driven. So I do like Cowboys from Hell. I don't think it's good all the way through. I think both those albums that came out during that period suffered from a little bit of filler towards the end. So like 3 or 4 songs after, the last 3 or 4 songs, they're too long. I think those albums are too long. That's one thing. And those songs aren't bad by any means, like Medicine Man or whatever the fuck. I don't think they're bad, but I think they do kind of fill out the album a little too much. And that was because at the time, the compact disc thing was like so hot. Like, the whole thing was like, we got to fill out the album. And that's when these long ass albums, which aren't actually as much of a thing now as they were back then. There's some bands are doing 35, 45-minute albums again. Like Queensryche did that self-titled album, years back that was only like 38 minutes, and they were like, oh wow, is it an EP? But then more bands have been doing that. So it's like the CD thing really made that. Fear of the Dark by Iron Maiden, getting back to Iron Maiden, it's like their second longest album or something. It's like, man, we gotta sit through this and trudge through all these different songs and stuff. Yeah. So Pantera were kind of a victim of that from the onset of their major label career. And I think that those albums, the first 3, or the second 3 with Phil, Cowboys, Vulgar Display, and Far Beyond Driven, more so Far Beyond Driven, because Far Beyond Driven just like, I think that was when I was starting to kind of question Pantera. I liked Vulgar Display of Power. I think it has a lot of hardcore and groove metal influences that were good. And the second half is a little bit more shaky, but I still like it. Far Beyond Driven is where it kind of like, I fucked your girlfriend last night, stuff like that. It's the machismo and like the faux like tough guy thing that became popular in metal after the streetwise machismo faux whatever thing that really was encapsulated on Far Beyond Driven, and that kind of influenced like Five Finger Death Punch and all that stuff. That was a bad influence on a lot of metal and metalcore and groove metal and new metal and U metal, by the way. I'll just call it NU metal. And that was kind of a unfortunate thing with Pantera as influencing all that. I think they brought the wrong attitude to metal, but I think that's only because they were so ubiquitous as far as their influence and everything. It's like, if we were hearing about equal time was given back in 94 to, or 93 or whatever, Carcass and like Napalm Death, and then like, some of these bands coming out of Europe like Blind Guardian or whatever, or some of the black metal bands and progressive bands or whatever. If there was equal time given, then we wouldn't be thinking of Pantera as like this band that like ruined, like a lot of the metal elitists wouldn't think of them as a band that ruined metal and stuff, because there was just one face of metal that was going on at the time. But the fact that they were kind of ubiquitous on MTV, people wearing the shirts, it's like the only metal band that existed for 2 years, 93 through 95, pretty much, like in the public consciousness. And I think that was a big thing for people. Pantera, man, it's like even Slayer were like, what happened to Slayer? Oh, Divine Intervention's not a bad album, but it was just like kind of one of those things. So with Pantera, it was just like, it's everywhere, and it's like the virus. So it's like people I think a lot of metal diehards got sick of that. Either they jumped on the bandwagon or they got sick of it. And I think it pushed out a lot of good stuff, and it kept in a lot of bad stuff, bad trends in metal. And I'm not saying that Pantera is at fault for some of these band trends. Like, what I mean is like them doing these types of things, like this faux tough guy thing, these simplified groove metal riff patterns. Not all simplified. Some of it's somewhat technical with Pantera. Some of these, ideas that they pushed in their songs and stuff. It's fine if Pantera did it, but when everybody else started doing it and everybody else started watering it down and then mixed it with rap and alternative and called it NU metal, that's when shit got fucking bad. And that's when I started, when I got back into metal in the late 90s, I started to rebel against all that stuff. And that's one thing about Pantera that always bothered me, is that they were influenced on a lot of bad stuff. Like Trent Reznor says, vulgar display of power got me to play heavy on Downward Spiral or whatever, or Broken or whatever. Maybe, I think maybe more Downward Spiral. And that's cool, that they influenced mainstream people, but there was a lot of stuff going on. There was a lot of heavier stuff happening. So when you hear this, like, it's fine doing like the song like Mouth for War, it's cool. But like Slaughtered from Far Beyond Driven, it's almost like this half-ass. When I heard it at the time, I thought it was like this half-ass corporate mall death metal. And that's not, obviously Pantera didn't intend it to be that way, and Phil Anselmo has his underground cred that he always did to some extent, but it just sounded like that to me at the time. Now it's like, it's an okay. I don't like Far Beyond. I think Far Beyond Driven is where they kind of lost the plot, in my opinion. I haven't really listened to Great Southern Trendkiller or Reinventing the Steel that much, and people praise Great Southern Trendkiller a lot, but I'm just like, whatever. But I think they lost the plot in the second half of Far Beyond Driven in a lot of ways. It just seemed like, to me, it did. And you can attack all you want. Say I'm antiquated, even though, whatever. So that's kind of where I stood with Pantera at the time. And, I started listening to a lot of other stuff. I mean, Carcass Heartwork came out in '93, and my friend and me were kind of out. We were out of. I wasn't really that into Pantera anyway, because they had. I think it's kind of this, like, samey kind of production. A lot of their albums, and Terry Day's a great producer, but like, the production was just like all flatline. This is before digital really caught on too, and that's really funny. But the way they used to produce the albums just kind of had this sterile kind of sound, and that's maybe the solid state amps Dime used, probably not, but it kind of had that thing. And with the filler at the later part of these albums, I just kind of got bored a little bit. But I do like the first three with Phil, including Power Metal. And let's talk about that. Power Metal is the most underrated metal album of all time. I mean, it's a great fucking power/speed metal album, and it gets, it doesn't really get the praise that it deserves. And that album, when I heard that in the early 2000s, and I was like, damn, what happened to this style? He sounds like Rob Halford meets Jeff Tate on Rock the World. It's an awesome album. And I think they should have reissued that at some point for real, like Atco Records or whatever. There's nothing wrong with the album. The album cover, they look glammed up, but whatever. A lot of people did. King Diamond, the band King Diamond, on the first three or three albums from King Diamond, there's plenty of hairspray and mascara to go around. Not only make King Diamond's makeup. So it's an unfortunate casualty of history that power metal never got properly reissued or gets the praise it deserves. Of course, amongst the metal underground, a lot of people say that that's their best album, and I would happen to agree. But yeah, it does seem a little calculated sometimes. Some of Pantera's angst and aggression and macho attitude, Phil Anselmo's rants and all that shit. So that was one thing that kind of bothered me too. He got his whole thing from these hardcore guys in the 80s and Henry Rollins and, various guys, his whole shtick, In fact, I think during the vulgar display of power era, people compared him a lot to Rollins, because Rollins, they both had like the shaved head or short hair and like the tattoos and the muscles and fucking shirtless in the pictures and stuff, or the live stuff. And that's actually a compliment to Phil Anselmo at the time. But I think as time went on, he got more into heroin, and just the albums has got kind of, I don't know. Far Beyond Driven just seems like it's like they're just fucking around half the time, like the second half of the album. That's what I always thought. It was like, oh yeah, they got all this money to fuck around for the last half hour of the album. So that's what I thought about that. I never listened afterward because there was just other things to get into. And that's what I mean about the ubiquitousness of Pantera. That bothered me at the time. It still does. People, you talk about Pantera as like they're the holy grail of metal, when there's fucking millions of other bands that are just as good, and of course, to my personal opinion, better. But that doesn't mean Pantera has no place. It influenced a lot of people. A lot of people probably picked up a guitar because of Dime. Just like Ace Frehley in the '80s, like his hero Ace Frehley. A lot of people. I mean, countless bands. And there are good bands doing groove metal that weren't like fucking cheesy or didn't go nu metal like Machine Head or something at some points. There's like Biomechanical is a band like that. There's other bands like that have done good groove metal, but groove metal became too ubiquitous, in my opinion, as the default thing to do if you're not going to go alternative in the '90s. Gotta have the groove metal, man. I mean, you could play solos, and not every band did that, but I think Overkill did that, and a lot of thrash bands. And Exodus kind of did that later on, but Exodus did it right. Another band that did groove metal right, in my opinion. A lot of their later albums definitely have that influence, but they did it right, in my opinion. And just like Creator, the band Creator from Germany, did put a little touch of mellow death in their later stuff, and I think they did that right too. My opinion. That's just my opinion. Of course, you can disagree with me. I'm a moderate metal elitist, but so that's what I think about Pantera. I think that people that put them on this pedestal are a lot of times misguided, because not always, like people that actually know about a lot of underground stuff and other stuff that was going on at the time, if they like Pantera, that's fine. And if they like Pantera on that level, they did have a unique sound, even though they did kind of take some of their style from Exhorder, or they're around the same time and influenced each other, whatever story you want to believe. But there were a lot of other bands that played heavy shit. I mean, fucking Bolt Thrower. I mean, how can you compare, Slaughtered to a Bolt Thrower album, or fucking, shit? Who else? Who was around at the time that were like fucking way heavier? I don't know. Just tons of bands. It's just like a lot of grind bands that were just crazier, or did crazy shit. I mean, Disharmonic Orchestra. I mean, how could you like compare a Pantera album to that? I mean, it's just fucking totally off the wall shit. Some of the stuff that came out, or Sore Throat, the very underrated early UK grind band, which is half a joke, and there's a lot of controversy with them. But that fucking shit. I mean, holy shit. Listen to an album by them. It's just like being fucking assailed by a fucking group of metal piranhas or something. It's just like, it's the craziest shit ever. So when people say Pantera's so heavy, I'm just like, dude, there's so many other bands. But if you like that particular strain of groove metal / thrash, whatever, like especially the earlier Phil era Pantera, kind of exemplified, I think that's fine. I think it's good stuff, a lot of it. But I always had a middle of the road opinion about Pantera. I like some of their stuff. Power Metal's my favorite album by them, followed maybe by Cowboys, vying with equal time to a lot of Vulgar. But I don't like Far Beyond Driven that much. I didn't really get through Great Southern Trendkill. I think Reinventing the Steel is it's okay, but it's just like I think we need to count Pantera in metal history for the rightful place they were, keeping metal alive in the mainstream United States in the '90s, which is a very difficult thing to do. And I would call them metal. They weren't ashamed to use the word either. That's another thing about the '90s that really fucking sucked in the United States. Metal was all of a sudden this bad word because people thought of Poison. They have a rightful place, right? Pantera had a rightful place, but they're not on the throne of, I just don't think they're on the same level as the classic bands in many ways, even Metallica. And that's a very controversial statement, and people will hurl insults at me for saying this. I don't think they're on that level as far as, you know, being that great. I mean, there was other groove metal bands that were doing some really cool stuff too, like Propane and Prawn and you know, all sorts of bands like that. And what, you know, even White Zombie, you know, like La Sexistro or Lex Sexistro or whatever. That album is definitely groove metal. It's different than Pantera, but it's groove metal, and it's. I thought it was pretty damn good at the time. I listened to that a bunch, you know, and the whole album's good in my opinion. I mean, it's a little dry, like the melody, like Pantera has a little more melody, but you know, I'm not going to disown Pantera as a band. I think they're really good, and I think they had a good rightful place, but they're not on the throne. That's my whole point with this video. They're not on the throne. They're not Panterrible, but they're not the, you know, they're not on the level of Black Sabbath or Metallica or Iron Maiden or Judas Priest. That's just my opinion. And you can disagree all you want. I mean, some people are going to say, well, then who was at the 90s? Well, they're closer to that. We'll give them that. But metal by then had kind of gone a different direction where it was more segregated subgenres of metal. So you can't really say, this is my whole point. It's like, you can't really say one metal band ruled them all in the 90s. Because metal by then had become so, you know, separated as far as different subgenres and stuff. You could say that the kings of groove metal. I mean, there's no denying that. Or the kings of 90s mainstream metal. Fine, that you could say that. And they're legendary. You know, it's similar to like saying like, I'm gonna admit this. Like Kiss is one of my favorite bands, but are they on the level of influence of Led Zeppelin? No. I like them more than Led Zeppelin, but they're not on that level. No. Regardless of how many people in the 90s said, Ace Frehley, man, Kiss Alive, I bought it and picked up a guitar. Led Zeppelin, even though I don't like Led Zeppelin as much as Kiss, but I think that Led Zeppelin were a bigger influence on people. I don't think what I'm trying to say is Pantera are not on that level of historical influence in the same way. And maybe that's because what I said previously, it's tainted quite a bit, in my opinion. If Pantera would have influenced like all the types of metal that I like more, then I may say that they're on the level of Black Sabbath or Metallica or whatever. But the fact that they influence a lot of bad, even though I like Pantera themselves, and when they do this stuff, the fact that a lot of the traits that they have, when used by other bands, became really shitty. Just the macho, machismo, fucking whatever. You're a thug, you know, fucking walking around, respect me, blah blah blah, or whatever. Talking to me, you know, it got really fucking annoying, you know, with these bands, with these new metal bands, and then there's like. You tie that in with the alternative. You take the machismo of Phil Anselmo and you get like the angst and depression of Trent Reznor and like Eddie Vedder or whoever, and that's where you get Korn. And I always fucking hated that shit. And I still pretty much hate Korn. I don't hate them, but like I just don't really. It doesn't do anything for me, you know. So I think Pantera had a deleterious effect, whether intended or not, on the metal community as a whole, because it became less about, you know, even I mean, let's just even say thrash. Like, thrash was fun, you know. You had like MOD, like doing like surfing MOD, and I mean, thrash wasn't only fun. There was a lot of fucking serious shit, Nuclear Assault, and like, you know, all these bands doing all this serious shit too. But Pantera was just about the angst and like fucking, you know, and it's just like. And the fan base kind of spoiled it for me too, I'll admit. Like, just some of the fan base just didn't thought there were only two heavy metal bands ever in existence. There was Ozzy. I'm just talking about the fans, like some of the less educated fans of Pantera in like the late 90s, early 2000s. There's Ozzy, which includes Black Sabbath, because for some reason a lot of these people think Black Sabbath and Ozzy are the same, even though they had like 5 other singers in Black Sabbath. And then there's like Pantera and maybe Metallica. But they're going to blast the Black Album more than anything else. You know, it's just like this mainstream tunnel vision. And Pantera were definitely not themselves. The members of Pantera weren't in that category because Phil is, especially Phil, because he was always into the underground shit. But their fans on a whole, it's mainstream metal. It's mainstream. It's, I mean, in a way, my friend was right because it's like, it's not hair death metal, but it's very mainstream, well polished, produced metal that was supported by the corporation. That corporate record labels and stuff. And obviously, they were doing what they want to do, but it's just like it did have pop mass appeal. So they kind of were, whether conscious or not, they were doing stuff that did appeal to a more popular audience, and that's not bad. But when, I mean, obviously Iron Maiden in background, I mean, that's kind of a thing. But for me too, I mean, I listen to fucking AOR shit. So who am I to talk? But I think there was a very uh, popular, poppy element to the way Pantera was presented themselves, even for however heavy they got. It was never fucking Arch Goat, you know. You couldn't listen to like an Arch Goat 12-inch and then say like this sounds like Pantera. It's like they helped metal retain popularity, but they also kept the underground from rising above because they were so ubiquitous and unintended or not. So that's maybe what I'm saying. So they're not Pantera. They're Pantera. They deserve their place in metal history. They have a lot of good things about them. I don't love them as much as other bands. I don't love them as much as other people. That's just the way it is. Dimebag was a great guitarist. There's other guitarists I like better. I think Chuck Schuldiner is way more underrated than Dime is. And that's all I got to say.